It's been some time since I've covered Godzilla Final Wars, and I plan to cover him again once the Monsterverse drops both its new Monarch show and Godzillaxkongthenewempire. But before we face him off against Legendary Godzilla once again, I would like to analyze him on his own merits. How strong is this Godzilla on his own? So, what we have to understand here is that there is a discrepancy between what's actually in the film and its timeline, and what people will say. Many times what people will cite are things that are completely outside of Toho's canon in order to say that Final Wars is the strongest and fastest Godzilla up to this point. However, we will break down why most of those statements are completely irrelevant. As for now, what are his most impressive feats that we know of? Well, during his attack in 1954, we know that this version of Godzilla did survive the Oxygen Destroyer. The Oxygen Destroyer has been calculated multiple times into the multi-continental levels of power, and since Final War survived, he must have at least scaled to the baseline of its AP. We don't know the condition in which he survived it, so he may have been critically injured or he may have actually tanked it, but we know that he did survive it, so it's a good baseline. Also, he is called the strongest weapon of the Earth, so he would scale above it. This should get Godzilla into at least the pentatons, if not into the exatons already. We know that Godzilla gets sealed into the ice sometime either during the 1960s or during the 2000s, depending on which guides he used. After that point, at least 30 years goes without the Monster King rampaging, where numerous other monsters are faced by the Earth Defense Force. However, it should be noted that none of these monsters are on par with Godzilla himself. He is stated to be the strongest monster that the Earth has to offer, and is one of the strongest monsters in the universe, and by the end of the movie, he is the strongest in the universe. Gigan is stated to have raised the continents of Atlantis and Lemuria, something that also calculates into the multi-continental ranges of power, into the exatons. Gigan is able to somewhat hurt Godzilla a bit, however the difference between him and the Monster King is very clear in their first encounter. He is upgraded later on to be of use to Monster X, but he's still not able to really do too much. Speaking of Monster X, when the Tyrant arrives in his meteor form, Godzilla blasts into the sky, with this heat ray being at least multi-continental as well, given the fact it managed to stop the meteor's movement from being as fast as it would be, given the mass and speed that would be multi-continental plus at least, down to merely a small city-level explosion. We know that the explosion was caused by Godzilla's atomic breath. This is stated in the guise that it did blow up the meteor form. However, it should be noted that this was actually Godzilla's full power at the time, but it did no damage whatsoever to Monster X. So this should mean that Final Wars Godzilla was multi-continental at least at the start, but as we see, while he's initially weakened and also weaker than Monster X already, as the fight progresses he seems to gain an advantage. This most likely means that grows stronger as the fight progresses. Later on we see he's able to clash equally with Monster X, however the resulting explosion is able to knock both monsters to the ground for a prolonged period of time. This should be enough to qualify their clash as a one-shot, however Godzilla was able to get up from this, meaning he can take possibly up to 10 times his own attack potency, and still get up. This is relevant because when Monster X transforms into Ghidorah, he blasts Godzilla so hard that Godzilla isn't able to stand up again for the rest of the fight. This should mean that it's at least a 20 times difference from Godzilla's normal power, considering he's able to debilitate him completely. Ghidorah may also have been holding back, as stated that he is actually sadistic and may have actually just been toying with Godzilla the entire time, until Godzilla himself got boosted up. Based on these calculations, Ghidorah should at least be in the moon levels of power. We then know that Godzilla, once amped up, should be generally more powerful than Ghidorah, as he's now able to take the attacks with very little damage, and is able to return fire so hard that the head explodes. It should be noted though, that Kaiser's own beams are able to blast off his own heads, so it's possible that the gap between base Godzilla's attacks and Ghidorah isn't very large. However, then Godzilla finishes Kaiser off with the Burn G-Spark Heat Ray. Comparing the first explosion to the Ant-Red Spiral Ray, this gives a difference of about 20,000 times. This should mean that Godzilla is now into the small planetary ranges of power at least, if not outright planet level. This is consistent because while the actual explosion itself is multi-continental to moon level, the shockwave it creates is actually planet level as well. This would also back up multiple statements through the movie that Godzilla was capable of destroying the world at any time he wanted. We should know that this isn't life-wiping because, as specifically brought up in the movie, the humans were under the actual impression that another large planet, Godzillaath, was going to shatter into the Earth and destroy it completely. Such a feat would calculate into the large planet levels of power. Godzilla would upscale this hypothetically if you do grant this feat, and it specifically stated again that if he was let out he could destroy the planet as well. Gigan also has a statement that may imply he may be a planet buster too, and we know Godzilla could handily deal with him. We know Gigan was also able of soloing this amped up human race, who may possess planet levels of overall power. However, again, it is mentioned by the Exilians that this would have to be humanity's total firepower in one go. But overall, if you take the narrative that Gigan is above humanity, then this would put him at least large planet, and Godzilla even further into it. This may be consistent because, as a variation of the original Godzilla, one may be able to argue that Final Wars' breath is as hot as the 1954 beam. While many guides commonly cite this beam at 100,000 degrees Celsius, which would get a temperature emissivity of into the large country to continental ranges, one scan in particular cites 100 million degrees for the atomic breath's temperature, which would make sense considering it is meant to be a nuclear bomb's blast. While there are not exactly feats to support Final's breath being so hot, one could reason it given that most Godzillas have this stated temperature, if not higher. Some versions of Godzilla are able to burn creatures that can survive nuclear bombs, so this may apply to Final Wars himself. However, it should be important to note that Final Wars' timeline is completely separated from everything else. Given this maximum hypothetical, a 100 million degree breath would generate large planet levels of power. Considering Monster X tanked this, and then Godzilla proceeded to do better with his bare fists, and we know that the difference between fists and blasts is at least a one-shot, considering Kaiser was able to take physical hits from Final Wars but could not take the breath without exploding. This should mean that it's at least a 10 times amp for his power-ups. We know that the beam clash then one-shot again, and we know that Kaiser scales at least 20 times above this amped version of Godzilla. This should mean that everything from base Final Wars up to the full power of Kaiser-Ghidorah should be in the highest echelons of large planet level. This would mean that amped Final Wars is in the dwarf star levels at lowest, and if not, all the way up to actual star level. This may be consistent because if we use the fact that most Godzillas have radioactive breath, and radiation does attack on the subatomic scale, this may mean that we can use subatomic destruction for the attack. If that's true, this calculates up to dwarf star level as well very consistently. But what about speed? After all, Final Wars is noted as being 3 or 4 times faster than any previous Godzilla, so clearly he must have some impressive speed feats. Some monsters are able to evade masers, which masers are microwaves, meaning they are light speeds. Final Wars is generally among the faster of the monsters, able to blitz even the likes of Rodan in just straight movement speed. Even without the light speed scaling presented, Rodan is able to cause supersonic booms, meaning this Godzilla can run at supersonic speeds at least, and considering he blitzed Rodan, this may be even higher. We know that the Monster X meteor was traveling at least relativistic speeds, but most likely even faster than the speed of light, considering it came from another star system. But when Godzilla blasts it, it is at least moving at 67% the speed of light. Godzilla sees this as slow. Given this, we can calculate exactly how fast Godzilla's perception is. Doing this would result in the lowest ends of at least faster than the speed of light, if not with the maximal calculations to the 10 to the 32 times speed of light range, or FTL+. This is important because Kaiser is actually able to completely blitz Godzilla. Godzilla charges up, fires his atomic breath, Kaiser charges up mid-beam and then fires, with the results of this meaning that Kaiser could charge up and fire 9 times faster than Godzilla himself. This should mean that Kaiser is anywhere from 9 times to 261 times the speed of light. We then see that once amped up, Final Wars is able to completely reverse this speed blitz, meaning that his speed increased by at least the same amount. Doing this would get Final Wars to at least 80 if not all the way up to 2,000 times the speed of light, or MFTL plus. So, there we have it. In terms of direct feats, we can get Final Wars to at least multi-continental to planetary, with massive high-ends up to dwarf star level off of his own showings. However, with possible context from other parts of the timeline, he may be up to star level with his own actual feats, and speed ranging from at least FTL, possibly into the massively faster than light range. But there's an elephant in the room. Many people will cite various statements claiming Final Wars is the strongest Godzilla put to screen by Toho, and so he should upscale off of feats from Showa and Heiseigodzilla as well as everything else. Many of these are misinterpreted, and at best, if not just outright rat. One scan is directly from a wiki straight up saying that a random sci-fi magazine is one that contributes a strongest statement to Final Wars, but it has no authority from Toho themselves. The Final Wars film director wanted a more powerful Godzilla, but as we know, author intent doesn't matter post-release due to the death of the author logical fallacy. So if something from the author contradicts the work, then it should be discarded. The director once said he wanted a stronger and faster Godzilla and said that the, quote, recent Godzilla movie seemed to lack power and speed. This is most likely referring to the Millennium movies because we know he actually has a deep respect for the Showa era, and while he hates the Heisei era as per his own admission, he states that Godzilla's size and power in Final Wars is a return of the Monster King. Given Final Wars is 100 meters and shares multiple of his Heisei powers such as the Spiral Breath and the Nuclear Pulse in some variety, this most likely means that the benchmark he's referring to is Heiseigodzilla. So in his opinion, Final Wars is a faster Heiseigodzilla, not stronger, as some will try to say. One interview from a Demon Slayer and Fate creator says that Godzilla can shoot down Ultraman before he could reach him because his breath can hit meteors. I shouldn't have to tell you all this, but Ultraman is a good bit above meteor level. However, the theater program says that Kingghidorah is the strongest Ghidorah, with stuff such as the Final War script intending Kaiser initially to be a transformation of King Ghidorah, and so many scale Kaiser above every version of King. However, something to note is that Final Wars' timeline has its own King Ghidorahs, which while they don't have their own feats, can maybe be argued to scale off at least the baseline of a Ghidorah's feat, which is their meteor being able to survive a planetary explosion. This could also translate to star explosion, but at least it would be a baseline of planet level, which would again mean that Kaiser is above planetary, which is also stated in a recent guide that Kaiser has cosmic levels of firepower, which is vague but should mean at least planets, and he threatens the very existence of planet Earth, meaning he should be at least a planet buster too, which is consistent with some of the higher end scaling I gave. The reason why you cannot scale him to Showa, Heisei, and Grand King Ghidorah, however, is because Final Wars exists in a completely different timeline. It is stated that it is absolutely disconnected from everything in the Showa and Heisei series, with an official guide promoting Shin Godzilla referring to Final Wars as existing outside of anything connected to the 1954 film. It is as canon to the original timeline as the MonsterVerse Shin Godzilla in 1998. Because it is not canon to anything, you cannot scale it to anything without just being a liar. I'm sure there will be someone else who cites another Final Wars statement here or there, but I believe I've covered most of them that are relevant in this video. So even without scaling to other versions of the character, he seems pretty impressive actually. However, consider that Godzilla-Earth, Godzilla from the Mechagodzilla film, showagodzilla, and heiseigodzilla all have consistent statements and showings of at least star levels of power and black hole feats. Scaling to the likes of supernovas and black holes generates at least solar system levels of energy, and then all of them got stronger from there. Meaning that among the Toho Godzillas, even with the highest end interpretation that's valid for Final Wars, he's coming up quite short. Such as 2000 being more radioactive than anything in nature, which would include gamma ray bursts and supernovas. So Final Wars, even at his best scaling that I can reasonably give him, is not the top tier god that many interpret him to be. However, how does he compare to the MonsterVerse version? We'll see by the time New Empire drops. Thank you all for watching. like and subscribe, all that nonsense, and we'll see you in the next one.